Another edition of Discussions of Truth. I'm your host, Ian Hamilton Trottier, coming at you every Wednesday, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard. This is a doubleheader, 6 o'clock hour, bringing on Russ Baker, who was under the weather last week, and so we made a slight change and brought on Dr. Jane Ruby. Catch that episode. She is a double PhD. Washington, D.C. based pundit. A Sea of New Media is her book, and it basically is an attempt to get people to realize that yes, there is corruption in American media, and it's becoming increasingly and ever so more increasingly damaged. That is the way that you receive information, and the information basically that you received is tainted. You are brainwashed. Okay, you're brainwashed. You're brainwashed from early school, from the curriculum you're seeing. If you have not read, if you have not heard me talk about Charlotte Iserbyt, former guest on the program, the deliberate dumbing down of Americans. Okay, yes, the Americans are deliberately dumbed down. You are deliberately meant to simply conform to society and become a good taxpayer and just make the wheel run. Make money for the powers that be. Okay? Don't question authority. But if you just heard Kevin Annette, we joined us the previous, the initial hour, and what he talks about is a movement in Canada, 58% now. I'm not sure what polls he's reading, but 58%, according to what he understands, of Canadians want to become a republic. That is break away from the colonial empire, or the former colonial empire. And I question whether it's a former. I question that. What is a former? Because are you aware that the finances of England are separate from the crown? So that yes, the Queen is a very wealthy woman. She has her palaces and her castles, and she has her golden chariots. But are you aware that her banking, the Bank of England, is separate? It's not even government controlled. Ring a bell? It should. The Federal Reserve. That's not a federal system. The Federal Reserve is nothing federal. It's not government controlled. In fact, it's never audited. It's never audited. And it's been in place since 1913 under Woodrow Wilson. Yet, what? It takes a major crisis, it takes a major a recession or depression for Americans to start talking about that again? Oh, it'll happen again. Yes, it'll happen again. The Federal Reserve is not federal. And if you have information that proves that it is federal, please send it into the program, iantrottier.com. Send it in. I'm not saying that I specifically have a problem with it. I'm just saying that if you're a constitutional republic, and it's the effort 350 million wide, population wide, is that every person represent themselves. That you achieve and fight for balance and equality for all, a la Martin Luther King, then you should have a financial system that is at least representing you. It's not. It's not representing you. And let's thread in the Bush family now, because that will be the topic of our next guest. We're going to wait a few minutes to bring him on. But yes, he'll be talking about the Bush family. So what I'm talking about is, why fight? And nothing against the military, and nothing against defending yourself, your homeland, but how much were you defending a homeland under the initial Bush's invasion? What was it, of Kuwait? Was he went to was Operation Desert Storm. Isn't that what the name of his conquering efforts to conquer the oil in that region? And then Junior, and again, I don't necessarily have anything against Bushes. Okay, what I have, my issue is whether you as an American, or me as an American, and certainly as a peaceful an American, are you working hard enough to get the politicians who are working for you to work for you? Or are they simply working for the powers that be and control and manipulate the American military and the American system and the American economy? Because fighting wars in the Middle East under a cover of oil or religion or whatever excuse is given to you, Afghanistan, terrorism, whatever it may be, how is that really defending your homeland? How is that really? Because isn't the overall isn't the motive to spread peace? Right? You want a global community. You want a united world. Oh, who doesn't? Nobody. Who likes wars? And that's kind of thing. If you like violence, then I don't have an answer for you. I don't like violence. Okay, I don't like wars. I don't like fighting. Okay, there's nothing civil. There's nothing peaceful about it. I don't like any part of that. Okay, I'm not saying that you shouldn't defend yourself. Okay, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying you shouldn't have a military. I'm not saying that. Okay, but it goes much deeper than that. The previous guest, Kevin Annette, talked about genocide and child trafficking and child raping going on in Canada and having been going on for decades. It's something that the Canadians are currently completely they have no idea. The majority have no idea it's happening. He caught wind of it, and he's been attacking. And what he's seeing is that there's ties that lead up to heads of state worldwide, and a lot of those ties lead right back to Rome. Okay, and that is what Kevin has been fighting now for 3 decades, and he relies on programs like this, Discussions of Truth, to get his word out, because they are squashed by mass media. Hence, our effort to run the site stopmassmedia.com, and that's where you can find streaming 24/7 a selection of all previous shows that we put on. We are now in our 4th season, and we thread through Winwood Radio. Okay. If this is your first time listening to the program, I urge you to please just type in your browser bit.ly, bit.ly, that's bit.ly, it's a short link, / Zika, capital Z-I-K-A, Zika, Miami Beach, capital M&B. Type that in your web browser. I think if you probably type Zika, Miami Beach in without the short link, you'll probably yield the same result. That is an article that I wrote now 4 years ago, 2016, regarding the Zika virus that came ashore in Miami-Dade and the controversial pesticide combated to fight the so-called Zika virus. And what I found should really appall you. And yes, it does link to the coronavirus. Let's give another example of how the media is completely manipulated today. Zero Hedge published an article, tweeted an article about the coronavirus and suggesting that a researcher, a doctorate linked to the Wuhan lab there knew that this outbreak was on the verge of happening, suggesting that it may have been orchestrated by human beings, perhaps deliberately released, and that that researcher had run ads looking for help to come in with his studies. Okay, certainly is simply suggesting that may have happened got Zero Hedge completely banned from Twitter. So ask yourself, if that person was you writing that article at Zero Hedge, you simply are suggesting something out of the box right? You're suggesting an alternative view, an alternative theory, even if you don't have enough information or research or science to back it up. If that person was you, that you were suggesting that, hey, my suggestion is that is against the mainstream. How would you react if it was you that was banned? Miriam Hennon been on this program three times. She's personally interviewed Aaron Brockovich, and she has been shadow banned a number of times for doing just that, for suggesting an alternative from the main view, a la JFK, right? I mean, many Americans still question the Lee Harvey Oswald angle. Okay, you suggest something against the mainstream or the government. You are the government. You are the government. You're listening to my voice right now. You are the government. I don't care where you are in the world. You are the government, and it is your human right, in my view, to voice your opinion and to take any law or any or any opinion, any way of life living, take it to task, question it, okay? And that's a whole democracy, right? The majority rule. The majority rule. The majority rule. Okay, getting off subject, perhaps. But if it is you, if you're the one that's being attacked because you suggest an alternative thought, then would you have a problem with that? Thinking should be free, right? All right. So the thought incepts in your brain. You write it down, and you are banned from an electronic platform that doesn't hurt anybody or anything because of an alternative view or an alternative thought. Okay, that's called complete brainwashing. Okay, it's manipulating how you think, and it's manipulating how you live your life. Because then you become scared. I mean, that's kind of like terrorism, isn't it? All right, because then you become scared. All right, so perhaps I'm philosophizing here, but that's because I can. All right, so IanTrottier.com. Follow me on Twitter. Follow me on Instagram. Both handles INTROTTIER. Donate to the program. Buy shirts. I've got shirts for sale. No More Lies. StopMassMedia.com. You can get those on the website IanTrottier.com. You can also get them via StopMassMedia.com. And every Wednesday I'm here, 5 o'clock Eastern Standard. And today, bringing a double header for you. Next week, Bandy Lee will be joining the program. Bandy Lee, give you a quick synopsis on who she is. Dr. Lee is an author of a New York Times bestselling book, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. She's a leading violence expert and forensic psychiatrist. She's the president of World Mental Health Coalition. We are speaking out at this time because we are convinced that as the time of possible impeachment approaches, Donald Trump has the real potential to become ever more dangerous, a threat to the safety of our nation. Okay, she'll be joining the program next week to talk about her book, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. 37 psychiatrists and mental health experts assess a president. We'll be following that on the 26th of February, closing out the month with Tom Hartman rejoining the program. He joined us back in August. And we're starting up the month of March with Kevin Shipp, who'll be joining the program. The shadow government is a system that manipulates Washington, D.C. behind the scenes, that operates beyond the control of Congress, that even dictates the actions of the president and affects the daily lives of every American. It is real and has been growing in complexity for over 60 years. While the American people work long hours just to survive and make ends meet, the shadow government spends billions of dollars on secret operations, overthrowing governments and engaging in covert wars that kill thousands, all without any vote or say by the American people. The people pay the taxes the shadow government uses to fund those operations. The people starve while the kings shower themselves in gold. That is a quote by Kevin Shipp, author of From the Company of Shadows, former CIA operative. As I'll be starting next month, And again, I'm here every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard. We've got a slate of guests coming your way. Pharma will be the topic of discussion mid-April, which will completely obliterate the pharmaceutical industry. Gerald Posner. All right, bringing on today's second guest, the guest for this hour. Dialing in Russ Baker. Quickly give Russ an intro here. Publisher and investigative journalist, basically. Controversial, credible, courageous. Bill Moyer said this about Russ. He seemed unimpressed with conventional wisdom, quickly spotted and dismissed spin, and wasn't intimidated by the powers that be. He'll be talking about Family of Secrets, the Bush Dynasty, America's invisible government, and the hidden history of the last 50 years. Gore Vidal said this about Russ Baker's book. One of the most important books of the past 10 years. Dialing in Russ right now.
Hey, Ian.
Russ Baker, welcome to Discussions of Truth. Great to talk to you. How's the cold?
Oh, struggling along here, but voice is a little bit better today.
Good to hear. Good to hear. So we appreciate you taking the time. This is a wonderful topic to discuss. The Family of Secrets, and my objective. We're now in our fourth year at Discussion of Truth. My objective is to really get Americans thinking about an alternative to what is given them in mainstream, and not to question, for instance, question the JFK narrative, question the mess that the country has been spending in the Middle East for really 30 years, because George Sr. was the first to kind of go into Kuwait with Desert Storm. But to question what is really happening, we've got a complete mess in D.C. Regardless of political view, my opinion is that both sides are totally corrupt. The impeachment hearings, it's literally, in my view, Russ, it's like a real-time reality TV show. You turn on CNN, MSNBC, it's completely garbage and trash, and that's what we have allowed ourselves as a nation to succumb to. But what you've done is you've really gotten into the Family of Secrets. That is the Bush Dynasty, and the America's Invisible Government, and the hidden history of the last 50 years. Tell us a little bit about you, Russ. What drove you to write the book? And then let's get into the book.
Sure, and I just want to back up and provide a little bit of context here, because I do notice that some folks are suggesting that there is some sort of equivalency between the Democrats and the Republicans. I don't think that's fair at all. We're a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization, but I like to say we're nonpartisan, but we're not blind, and I'm happy to talk about that. And I think that some of the things that are going on in this country right now under the Trump administration are deeply startling to all fair-minded people, to investigative journalists and authors, and I'm happy to talk about that, but I am very, very concerned about any kind of false equivalency. I certainly do agree, and I'm happy to talk about the so-called deep state and about democratic connections to the military-industrial complex, but the magnitude of what we're talking about is not the same between the two parties. So I just wanted to start with that and provide a little context. My own work, I have been an investigative journalist now for, must be going on about 30 years. In the course of my work, I found that the work of the media, and that would be particularly the corporate commercial media, but also some of the ideological media, were it just, what struck me was that when I would go look at stories and I'd want more answers, and I would dig deeper and deeper and deeper, I'd quickly see that they weren't providing these things. In fact, they weren't even asking these questions. They weren't trying to understand on a deeper level how and why things were happening. For example, why was it that the United States seems to be in a constant state of war all over the world all the time? And this has been going on now since the Second World War. We've basically been in wars, had bases everywhere, literally in more than 100 countries for most of the time. And I just thought, we're not getting good answers. And then I began following the money, as Deep Throat allegedly said, the Watergate scandal, and I started finding back histories that had never been reported. They weren't in the popular history books or the textbooks, the so-called government investigative commissions, whether it was at 9/11 or this bank most people have forgotten about, this BCCI, the hearings they held on Iran-Contra. They never got to the bottom of any of this stuff. And, you don't have to be one of those people who believes that there's something sinister behind everything to see the inadequacy of these reports. And then, of course, we go back to the Warren Commission, the same thing. Even the better inquiries into things like the assassination of public figures, such as the House Committee on Assassinations, pulled their punches and stopped before their investigators could go very, very deep. So this deeply troubles me. I don't think we're getting the real truth about most things, and that's my mission, to get to it, and that's why I started WhoWhatWhy.org, a nonprofit organization that takes no money from commercial interests and relies entirely on public donations to take the stories that others are, I think, handling in a superficial way and try to drill down.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Russ, that is becoming what you've been doing now for 30 years. WhoWhatWhy.org is becoming so much more important in the age of, since the current administration has gotten in the office. And I love what you said about bipartisan. And yes, I definitely want to get into that because I feel that we are being pigeonholed to take sides deliberately to create a divide, which is absurd. However, in the age of fake news, I don't remember the previous administration addressing that very much. So I'm saying in the age of fake news, what you've been doing now for 30 years is becoming increasingly more important to receiving information, because what is received on the mainstream is in my opinion completely it's frivol, and it's meant to simply brainwash viewers and listeners.
One of the things that strikes me is, for example, there's this news story the Washington Post has out about how the CIA had a backdoor into this software, and originally they were cryptography machines, but then it became software, and that was sold to so-called enemies, but that they also had a backdoor even into their own friends. And it's a fascinating article, but what I noticed about it, and I was just emailing with a colleague, is that there's a tendency to tell these stories as if they're sort of like interesting history. Isn't it interesting that they were doing this? And the article sort of presented as if somebody, excuse me, got a bit of a cold here, as if somebody at the CIA had provided this to them, which may well be, but it's as if the agency's saying, we don't do this kind of thing anymore, but you might find this interesting. And, that strikes me because there's so little by the media about what's going on now or what's been going on in recent history. And so, we just saw something about the killing of Malcolm X, where they're saying, "Oh, new information. It wasn't these black guys. It was these black guys. It was these other black guys." And I'm thinking, that's such disinformation because, of course, anybody who's read up on that know that there were all kinds of complex factors involving the national security state, including the New York Police Department and the FBI. And so the fact that they sort of claim, that, oh, we've dug deeper and now we have another answer. These are sort of distractions, deliberate distractions, and they're not dealing with, what are these entities now? What is the CIA? What is the FBI? Who really has any say or even knows what they do? Does a person who's elected briefly to the Oval Office, do they actually have any say or real knowledge of what goes on there? Does even the briefly appointed director of those agencies really know what's going on? And I have to tell you, for my upcoming book, I'm going to be quoting some former directors of these places who admitted to the president that they themselves had fairly limited knowledge on what was really going on in their own shop.
That's wonderful. I like to. I don't know if you're familiar with Ray McGovern, but he's been very outspoken about what's happening in the CIA, and he actually talking about speaking of Bush's, to the first Bush to occupy the Oval Office, he would hand deliver and daily brief him. That's the level of the CIA that Ray got to in the 80s, and now he's completely he sees the corruption in the CIA. And he's totally outspoken about it. He joined the program about 2 years ago, and he had this to say on the program. He says, "Ian, we no longer have any real sense of free media. The only hope now is people like you who can repair the damage and get people listening to people who know what they're talking about." So I don't know who you're going to be quoting. And next month we'll be receiving Kevin Schiff, who's another former high-ranking CIA analyst. He'll be joining the program next month. So I'm not sure who you'll be quoting in your new book, but I think that's very wise for you to be doing.
Yeah, the thing is, if you look at these agencies, it's not like the entire place or all the people are in any way bad. I think these places are full of people who are patriots and who signed up, just, whether it's those agencies or it's the military, where they signed up because they were sold that this was something very honorable and it was important work to do. And I think certainly some of the work they do is honorable and is important. The problem is that the entity also does other things that they may be often unwittingly, because it's so compartmentalized, contributing to, and the overall thrust of the work being done by these entities individually and then collectively with the larger U.S. government, and I would say big parts of business as well, may not be in the interests of the public. And when I talk about the public, I'm a little reticent about these things, about American interests, because I get that we live in a country, and I get that we are proud to live in this country, and we don't want this country to be harmed. But at the same time, really, if we're human beings, we don't want anybody to be harmed. We want the standard of living in the world to rise. We want everybody to have the right to not die from poverty or starvation or war. And so, I think we have to look at these things differently, and once we start doing that, we see that the bifurcation of us versus them, meaning Americans versus the other, whoever that is, the people who are trying to come into this country to take our jobs supposedly, or this or that, is actually a little bit of a shell game, because in fact there are so many problems right in this country between Americans and other Americans, and where it becomes that, and it becomes about Americans versus other Americans, it is again the other. If you're white, it is those black people. If you're one religion, it is the people from the other religion. But that is something that has always been used to divide people, and usually to divide working and middle class people from each other, rather than focusing on the tremendous, not only the inequalities, the financial inequalities, but also the fact that the system itself is stacked, that the rest of us cannot even get a fair shake with the criminal justice system, with government agencies, certainly with companies that favor those who have the money over those who don't. So I just see things a little bit differently.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And again, the cornerstones of the Constitution that makes the Republic a free place is just that: the freedom of, freedom of religion, freedom of press, and certainly press is becoming completely manipulated. Russ, have you gotten into at all former Stanford Hoover fellow Anthony Sutton? Have you gotten into his work at all?
Oh, sure. Yeah. He was terrific. Yeah. Let me say this in terms of the press and in terms of deep inquiry. I mean, one of the interesting things is that most of the American public doesn't really pay a lot of attention. And I think if you ask people, they'll admit it. They have their jobs, they have their families, they have their hobbies, and so forth. And then they have some time they spend relaxing, consuming entertainment. And then you say, well, what time is left to consume information about matters of public policy? And the answer is almost nothing. And of course, I'm sure you, Ian, know people who say, I don't follow politics or I don't listen to the news. And, I get that because it's discouraging and it's depressing. But at the same time, we really screw ourselves when we don't pay attention, because other people are paying attention. And when you don't pay attention to something, somebody else is taking advantage of the situation and really harming you and harming your interests. And so we've all got to step up. And I would say that even among those who do pay attention, there's another problem, which is that if you look at these TV things like Fox and in a different way, even CNN and MSNBC, I do think the accuracy of their information is higher than it is at Fox. But still, all of these places repeat the same stuff. They've got these so-called experts on who have their own clients and their own agendas. It goes on and on and on with the same stuff. You learn very, very little. And then there are what we'll call the prestige institutions, these name-brand media outfits that educated people who consider themselves sophisticated, consume. And I can tell you, living here in New York, living in Manhattan, there's a sort of an elite here, people who are, again, tended to do well in life, successful, smart, accomplished, and they rely on their information for really from a handful of these outlets, and what they read are books that are on the New York Times bestseller list. And so what happens is it is possible essentially to control what even the elites know or think they know. And the kind of work that I did with my book, Family of Secrets, which initially, and I have to tell you, when it first came out, my publisher, Bloomsbury, very well-respected, UK-based publishing company that had published Harry Potter, did a lot of important works. They were proud to publish my book. They thought they would put me on every major TV show and that the book would be reviewed positively by all these outfits. I got a total stonewall. And I was shocked because, here I am, a credentialed journalist with all the pedigree and the, Columbia journalism, thing, diploma and all that. I was always welcome as long as I did stories that didn't really make too many waves. But when I started going deep into these stories, the Kennedy assassination, Watergate, all of these things, where I discovered a whole different narrative than I'd ever seen anywhere else before, that I really pieced together through hundreds of thousands of documents, more than 1,000 interviews. I pieced all this stuff together, and when I brought it to these places, they all went, "Wow, this is amazing." And then somebody somewhere higher up in these places shut it down. They said, "This, for whatever reason, we cannot run this stuff." And part of it, I think, was it was too disturbing. It was too new. It was too different from the conventional chorus that has been sung over the years.
Right, and that conventional chorus perhaps has been deliberately sung the way that they've sung. So this is interesting, Russ, because you bring up the JFK narrative and the Warren Commission, and it seems like if you as an American, if you second guess that, if you pose an alternative theory or motive or view, then you're pigeonholed into being this theorist or so and is that also part of that manipulation perhaps? And then where is it coming from? So is that leading into what the current administration refers to as the deep state? And what is the deep state? Do you get into that? What is it, Russ? From what you've
Sure. Well, let me just start with this Warren Commission thing. The fact of the matter is, until I began looking into the Kennedy thing, I I had heard growing up, that there was the Warren Commission, there was this report. It sounds very impressive, the people who were on the commission. And I had heard that this guy Oswald had shot Kennedy. What did I know? I mean, that seemed to be right. So if somebody had told me it wasn't Oswald, I would just assume that they were a nut. And I think most people who don't dig into these things assume that what they hear is correct, and somebody with an alternative viewpoint must be crazy. And I have to tell you, even as a functioning journalist over the years, and even running the nonprofit WhoWhatWhy that I founded, our first instinct is to look at people's credibility and credentials, and that comes from the establishment. And so if somebody comes out of left field and just says, hey, I heard this thing, or I believe this thing that is accepted is untrue, we're wary of it. And so with the Kennedy stuff, the fact of the matter is, out of the entire population of the country, there's some small percentage, way under 1%, that has read a lot of books on it, where people really have investigated it. And I would say if you poll those people, about 90 to 95% of them believe that the official story is incorrect. So it's not really about the way that we are told to think about it. It's about the simple fact that we don't have the right information. That was my motivation in starting WhoWhatWhy. And I will tell you, as far as the deep state goes, that term has been so badly damaged that you can't even really use it, even though it is a legitimate term. But you see, the problem is this: the term deep state was a neutral term derived by largely by academia. It originated, as far as I know, in Turkey, and this was a common term in common parlance that was used. People would be taught about this at university. And the deep state, there was the state and there was the deep state. And the notion was the state was the visible official organs of the state, and the deep state was another layer, and it was people working in the institutions, in the establishment, doing actual work, who may have had their own agendas that did not necessarily comport with what the public was being told. And this is not, and I want to underline this is not a kind of a superstitious or way out there kind of notion. It's a notion that's true everywhere. Every big institution has the way that the public face that they put on it, and then there are the internal interests of elements. And, this is what I was talking about earlier with, say, the CIA, that somebody comes in temporarily as the CIA director, but there are people who've worked there for 10, 15, 20, 30 years, and they have institutional knowledge that's considered to be beyond top secret. They're not going to talk about it. They're not going to share it with their purported boss, and they have their own view of the mission of the agency, the role they've played, what the role should be. Also, a lot of these people historically, if you go back and you read my book Family of Secrets about the Bush dynasty, the recruiting for these agencies like the Central Intelligence Agency, like the to a somewhat lesser extent some of these other agencies, Defense Intelligence, NSA and so on, tended to be from the elites. These were the children of very wealthy families, banking families, chemical families, oil families, and they would go in there, and they came in with a mindset, and their mindset was that what was good for their families and what was good for business and what was good for the wealthy was the right thing. And the policies carried out covertly by these agencies over the courses of recent American history served those interests. And so the deep state was, to my mind, or is some loose network of people. I don't see it as necessarily an organized thing. There's no membership. It's not particular people. It's shifting people go in and out of it. When you are part of this kind of consensus building, largely unseen mechanism, you're part of the deep state. And the deep state includes banks and powerful corporations and so on, and it's a non-partisan phenomenon. I mean, I think when you look at somebody like John Brennan, who was the CIA director, was associated with the Democrats and with Obama, he's deep state. But on the other hand, he rebelled against what was going on with Trump against another part of the deep state. And I think this is critical because Trump, unfortunately, who I do think is an extremely, extremely dishonest and dangerous person, and who, as a journalist, I feel is basically borderline psychotic and doesn't even know right from wrong, misrepresents and lies about everything. And if you fact check him, there's practically nothing he ever says that is 100% or even 60% true. He decided to co-opt the term deep state largely on the recommendation of Roger Stone, who, with whom I've known over the years, and I've broken bread with. Roger got interested in this deep state phenomenon, read my book, Family of Secrets, and then wrote his own book, about the Bushes. I wrote about the Kennedys. He wrote something about the Kennedys. But see, what Roger did was Roger twisted, and I say this as a guy who I've had lunch with. I mean, I think he twisted this concept for his own political purposes, gave it to Trump, and then Trump was able to instrumentalize this to a base of people who were not educated, not well-read, don't really understand this phenomenon, who then began using it back against the Democrats when that's not really what it's about.
What is and not to get into current politics, but what is Trump doing? What's his motive in your opinion?
I just see him as a completely reckless, dangerous person who really has no idea what he's doing. I think, frankly, all the indications to me are that he's a mentally unhealthy person. And I don't want to compare to other countries, but there are other countries that had a mentally unhealthy person who was a great public speaker, rallied people who were feeling bad about their situations or themselves, and they got excited and they all showed up and they yelled, and really bad things happened. I think this country is on the precipice of tremendous danger. I live in New York. I covered Trump. I met Trump, when he was here. I mean, he was just this clown. He was this guy who basically bamboozled people through his business, lied about how successful his businesses were, and enough people kept listening to him and putting him on shows and buying his stuff, in inferiorly constructed apartments, and then he would stiff his contractors and the workers. I mean, the guy really has exhibited classic criminal behavior his entire life. So the fact that he's the most powerful person in the world is, of course, terrifying. And I have to tell you, it's terrifying to the deep state. Things are so bad that the deep state is starting to look better.
But no, it's not a lot. You've got highly credible journalists such as yourself, and then you look at the brilliance across this country, from Stanford to Harvard to Yale, or pick your school, Columbia, and this is the best we could do. It's laughable to me. Like I say, it seems like it's a reality TV show.
Well, what's also amazing, by the way, and I think this is part of the problem, is the whole way in which we choose leaders. Because, and I don't want to say, of course, when you watch those Democratic debates, I mean, they're all well spoken, they're all obviously very, very bright and so on. But are these really necessarily the most thoughtful, the wisest, the best communicators that this country has? I don't think so, and this is a little pet project of mine to try to figure out a better way to offer the public up potential leaders.
Yeah. So where do we go from here? With the voter fraud, and even the Iowa caucuses they're still a mess. Where do we go from there? Is there something that can be implemented to give a bit of a correction to what's happening?
Yeah, so I believe that the single most important thing we can do, it's just like if you got a drinking water supply and the water is dirty, the body is polluted, the public is at risk. The first thing you do is you work to clean the water. And I would say that our body politic is polluted. Our minds are polluted. The first thing we've got to do is unpollute all that. That's why I started WhoWhatWhy.org. That's why I made it non-commercial. We don't take ads. We don't take money from corporations or governments. We struggle because it's hard to get the public to donate, but we do honest work. I think that kind of thing of trying to dig down without a bias or an agenda, figure out what's really going on, and share honest information with the public is the solution. Because as we begin understanding what's going on, who's doing what the real options are, we begin course correction. Now, as far as elections, which you're talking about, WhoWhatWhy has been a leader. We started very, very early questioning the electronic voting systems that were being adopted everywhere. You know, originally, of course, we had paper ballots, and you say what you want. And, of course, the 2000 election, there were problems when you punched those paper ballots. But, I mean, paper ballots, at least the kind that you mark by hand, you can at least see what you marked, and the person who reads it can confirm that that's what you intended. And once we shifted, and I have to say, I mean, as far as I understand, at least several of the European countries to this day do their entire national election with paper ballots, and they get it all counted in a matter of hours. So the fact that we shifted to these black boxes created and owned by private companies where we don't even know who owns them, we don't know who programs them, we're in a very, very dangerous situation. And so my news organization, WhoWhatWhy.org, has been working for a number of years. We're ramping up to do more about these voting machines. The situation in Iowa, obviously, was with an app, so that's related. But we're also looking at the issue of what you called voter fraud and what we call voter suppression. We don't see practically any instances of what Trump claimed, which was what they termed voter fraud, which was supposedly illegal aliens attempting to vote at some risk to themselves. We saw almost no examples of that nationwide. In fact, almost every study shows so few examples of that. It's very difficult to go in on your own, one person at a time, and vote twice or something like that and change an election. I mean, it's just physically very, very risky. You go to jail for it and so forth. The counterpoint, which is institutional denial of people to vote, making it difficult for large numbers of people to vote, that is much easier to do. That's a mass project, and it can be done pretty easily, and we do see that happening throughout the country. And, of course, Trump tries to claim that it is, people from Mexico who are illegally voting and so on. It isn't. Everything we can see is that what's happening is voter suppression, and the people who are being prevented from voting, by and large, overwhelmingly, are black people, Latinos, some elderly people in certain areas, and youth, particularly college students, as well as a few other groups like Native Americans, and we saw it in North Dakota where they were it was being made difficult to vote. And what happens, Ian, is they put these impediments in their way, and there's a whole range of them. I'm sure we don't have time to go into it, but on our site, WhoWhatWhy.org, we've done scores of articles about all the ingenious ways in which people who want to vote are either prevented from getting to the polls, or if they get to the polls, they're told they can't vote, or if they vote, the votes may not be correctly counted. And I think that is the biggest threat to democracy, because the bottom line is you got to be nonpartisan about this. You can't be for only Democrats voting or only Republicans voting. Either everybody gets to vote or nobody gets to vote.
Yeah, well said, Russ. Next week we'll in getting back to the conduct, the mental state, really, of the current president. We'll be hosting Bandy Lee, who's the author of The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. She's out of Yale. But getting back to the whole notion, and you didn't mention it, but it is something that current administration, or the head of there, as mentioned, draining the swamp. I think that's one of the tickets one of the things selling points he won on. But you've alluded to the corruption, and you've got these real wealthy kind of families that feed into these wealthier corporations, and then how those corporations kind of swayed the thinking or narrative or whatever it may be. Let's visit for a few moments, and I know it's been a while since you wrote it, but let's visit briefly the family of secrets, and getting into Gerald Ford's role in the Warren Commission, because you got Alan Dulles. The Warren Commission seems to be kind of it comes to be written in a tunnel view, but yet the man that became elected president had a major role in the writing or development presentation thereof. It became the president of the Warren Commission, and Gerald Ford. What can you say about that, and how that relates to the Bush family, Russ?
Well, I mean, I got interested in the Bush family because I was fascinated with the fact that George W. Bush looked to be on his way to re-election in 2004 after it was revealed that the American people had been sold a bill of goods on Iraq and weapons of mass destruction. I had written about that, and then I was astonished to see that he was able to aggressively campaign and actually even vilify John Kerry, who, unlike Bush, was a war hero, did serve in wartime in a war, and I had done a lot of research on George W. and his not serving. So I became interested in them, and I started trying to figure out how George W. managed not to serve. Then I realized during my investigative reporting that his father had played a role, became more interested in his father, started looking at the father's trajectory, started trying to establish how would the father, another character who really did not wear greatness particularly, how had he made his way to the top. Then I began looking at him. I began looking at that he was CIA director. How had he become CIA director? And the more I looked at him, the more I discovered that George H.W. Bush, that's the father, I began to see indications that he wasn't the man I thought he was, that he was somebody else, that he had actually always sort of hidden what he was really doing, and that he'd had a whole lifetime of work in the covert services, that he had not only been appointed CIA director as a civilian who had no qualifications, is what we were told, but that in fact he himself had been a lifelong covert CIA officer. And once I found enough evidence for that, and this is all massively documented in my book Family of Secrets, I then started finding very interesting things about him, his network of people he was working with in the CIA in the 60s. I discovered that there were FBI documents suggesting that he was in the CIA in 1963, had some sort of intelligence awareness about the situation around the assassination of John F. Kennedy in Dallas. I then developed information proving that he himself was in Dallas at that time. I then found evidence from his own books, obscure references showing that he was in Dallas with a former CIA head of coups, head of coup d'etat, of overthrowing leaders, and that there were other CIA personnel there. And the more and more I looked at this, the more I thought, oh my gosh, Ian, I don't know anything about American history. This is like a movie. And I kept digging. I then found a pattern of CIA covert meddling with presidents, not just Kennedy, but then it continued that the Warren Commission had been basically pressured to crook the book, so to speak, and come up with a story that was supposed to satisfy the American people that everything was fine, that although the president had been murdered, there was nothing more there, no conspiracy. And then Gerald Ford, of course, as you say, he was put on the Warren Commission, played a critical role in covering up the fact that there were too many bullets, and the bullets came from the wrong angle to all have been from the 6th floor of the school book depository, which meant either Oswald didn't do it or there was a conspiracy. Ford, of course, was later rewarded by being made president. And then we have a whole story about Ford and the removal of Richard Nixon from office. And to show you what a nonpartisan I am, my book Family of Secrets gets into how essentially John F. Kennedy was overthrown by what you might call the deep state, and so, are you ready, ... was Richard Nixon.
Watergate. Russ?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I've got 5 chapters in Family of Secrets, the real story of the Kennedy assassination. I've got 3 chapters in there, the real story of Watergate. And, again, growing up as a kid, I thought, pure and simple, Richard Nixon is an ogre, and he was out of control, and he sent these burglars in. And it was only when I began digging that I began realizing that there was much more to that story. Yes, Richard Nixon had many problematical qualities. I in no way want to apologize for him, but that on the particular issue of Watergate, that he had been set up, and that there were elements within the national security state and the Pentagon and big corporations that just as they increasingly saw John F. Kennedy as antithetical to their interests, didn't like Richard Nixon. And by the way, I mean, with Trump, we have a completely different situation. We have, again, a growing sense among people who are in elite positions that Donald Trump is a problem. I think the difference this time is he is a problem. I mean, he's a problem to the extent that the people who like Trump are really, I don't want to call people names, but I mean, they are so ignorant of the basic facts. They don't read books. They don't know any of this stuff. I mean, I love all Americans, and I'm sure they mean well, but they really don't have any information. And they, cutting off their own noses to spite their face. They're angry, and I get they're angry about things, but this whole idea about draining the swamp, they're draining the swamp so that the wrong characters can survive. I mean, government, and everybody talks about how bad government is, and then, the second their kid is kidnapped, they want to call the FBI. They say government is so useless, and then they complain that the state hasn't repaired the highway so they can drive their SUV to the football game. They complain about how they hate government regulation, and then they're really, really angry when they get a cockroach in their soup at a restaurant. They want to know why the city's restaurant inspectors haven't shown up. So it's just full of a lack of understanding, a lack of perspective. Trump is single-handedly dismantling the government so fast on every possible level, resulting in increasing poisoning of our waters and our air, threats to the reproductive health of every woman who is pregnant. I could go on and on and on. The dangers are everywhere. We're going to start seeing it perhaps even with aircraft. And I have to say, I do believe the Russian meddling story. I was skeptical at first, but the more we dug, the more we were convinced there was something to it. And I have to say, I do think that all the evidence points to the fact that the Russians have something on Trump. And, I don't want to judge whether or not you would call him a foreign agent, but the net effect of what he's doing is to defeat the United States and to benefit the Russians.
No, that's very well said, Russ. Very well said right there. Well, I started this program 2016. We're going on fourth year now, and we started because in Miami Beach there was the local Zika virus, and then the threat of the pesticide. A good friend of mine had me go down to actually happens to be from Brooklyn. Had me go down to the town hall, and then the links that I was putting together just blew me away. I'd found that the Rockefellers owned a patent on the Zika virus, and that they also were the major shareholders of Chevron Chemical Corporation that engineered dibrom in the 50s out of Chevron Chemical. So putting those links together, similar to you, I certainly never Oswald was the narrative that I got. I wouldn't question that. 9/11, we got major terrorist problem, whether you or not. I mean, I never questioned that. But then once I started looking deeper, that's when I found that this is a far more a complex and sophisticated a task than I think certainly proven than the average American has any idea of what's happening. And you've said it very well there, Russ, in that Trump is completely dismantling our livelihood and the government that we know. Tell us in the closing minutes here. Tell us a little bit more about your current project and what we can look for from you.
If you talk about my book, I shouldn't have done this, but I after writing Family of Secrets and coming up with all this incredible Kennedy stuff, and finding that if we don't understand the main events of our history, we don't understand anything, and we don't understand why things are the way they are today, because they were created by these things that happened long ago. We can't fix anything, and we can't create a better future. And so that book did quite well, despite the blockade on it, you might call it. It became a bestseller, and still selling pretty strongly so many years after it came out. But after I finished that book, at some point I started thinking, there's a lot more to this Kennedy thing. And although there's so many books and many wonderful books about it, I never saw anybody who, to my knowledge, really went and looked at all the other books, looked at all the documents as much as they could, interviewed as many people as they could, and tried to really piece together a kind of an hour-by-hour account of how the whole Kennedy assassination came together. That's what I'm trying to do. I've been doing it for a decade. It's a huge amount of work. I have to do it in my so-called spare time when I'm not working 80 hours a week running WhoWhatWhy, the news organization. So it's hard, but I'm hoping that maybe in a few years it'll be done. and be happy to certainly come on and talk about it.
Fantastic, and we will gladly receive you. Russ, some final words, some final thoughts for listeners to close out.
Yeah, I would just say, listen, I know we're all depressed, we're all discouraged, it's overwhelming. We all need to go watch a good comedy and snuggle up with a loved one, but in the end, we need to recharge our batteries and go out and keep on informing ourselves. And I want to stress the fact that people say, well, what can I do? I'm just an individual. But, all those people you see running for president, they're just individuals. They managed to get themselves in a position where they were able to get on that debate stage. But, I think all of us really have a lot of power. And you can just start with very, very simple things like getting on social media, sharing this podcast, sharing articles and books with other people, enlighten other people, spread the word, get the truth out as widely as you can, and then we all begin working together to build a better future for everybody.
Incredible. Very well said. Ladies and gentlemen, Russ Baker. Russ, we look forward to bringing you back on. Keep up the excellent work. Thank you for joining Discuss Your Truth.
Thank you. Appreciate what you're doing.
Okay, and so there you have it. Look, I started this program very similar to what Russ is saying. You simply have more power, I think, than those who have power want you to realize you have power. And like Russ said, those individuals running for president, Bernie Sanders, John Biden, Elizabeth Warren, who we have been in contact with, and they have received and expressed a preliminary interest in what we're doing. That's actually the first time I've mentioned that on this show. But look, if you go through the guest list, again, we're in our fourth year now, and you look at the people that have come onto this program, the credibility, the scholastic achievements, that is a complete reflection, unfortunately, of the dire need for there to be real change to happen in this country, and not only the country but globally. Kevin Annette joined us last hour. Okay, this has been a double header. We're now in the 6 o'clock. We're in the 7 o'clock hour now, but the 6 o'clock hour Eastern. Kevin Annette's a Canadian-based author, and saying, "Hey, look, there's way too close of a link between church and state in Canada. 58% of Canadians want to become a republic, want to be completely like Scotland, right, in a sense, and Ireland. Okay, want to completely disassociate themselves from the crown, from the colonial empire. Okay, because there's way too much dirt happening. Okay, now Kevin's research is a little less palatable in a sense than what we've discussed here with Russ. But genocide, child trafficking, that's just completely disgusting as far as I'm concerned. Okay, and that's a very real look. Kevin's efforts led to the resignation of Pope Benedict in large part. That is the power of individual, just like Russ is saying. That is the power of individual. And if you just sit back and let this go by, and let your life go by, and just continue to be a contributor to someone else's life or corporation, then you're doing yourself and those around you an injustice. So if any of this resonates with you, do something about it. Like Russ has just said, retweet it, share it, share the podcast, Donate to the program. Donate to WhoWhatWhy. Donate to Kevin. What Kevin's doing. This needs to happen, folks. It needs to happen. Because your large corporations hidden in the fabric that you don't even take into consideration on a daily basis. Again, I'll say those that make up the Federal Reserve, if you will. Okay, the non-federal economic system that runs the military-industrial complex, a large portion, and not to mention the contributions you make when you pay your taxes to that disgusting war machine. Like Russ is saying, this country's been at war ever since World War II. It's constantly been taking the natural resources, taking the gold, the rape of Nanking, right? Taking these people's lives. Okay, is that the America that you want your children to inherit? I don't care where you've come from. I don't care what ethnicity or what culture you may, or your parents may, or your grandparents may represent. If you're in the United States, you are a beacon. It's that Constitution. In my opinion, it's the beacon. And again, Paul Craig Roberts, it's totally debatable whether any of those real values are in place now. But they are being threatened at an unprecedented rate. And your way of life is under drastic fire. You must take action now. This has been another Discussion of Truth. Next week, Dr. Bandy Lee from Yale will be joining us. A dangerous case of Donald Trump is what she will be addressing. You've tuned in to another Discussion of Truth. Share it with someone. Get the word out. And until next week, Wednesday, 5 o'clock Eastern, I'm your host, Ian Hamilton Trottier. Twitter, Instagram, Ian Trottier. That's INTROTTIER. Follow me on either one of those platforms, both the platforms. I'll be right back here in a week's time, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard. And until then, be awesome.